In April 1944, a wooden aircraft landed at RAF Cuttack in eastern India. Its skin was plywood, its frame was balsa and spruce. To the Japanese pilots who first saw it in combat, it was laughable, a relic from an era before aluminum and steel. They called it ki no gomi, wooden trash. But within weeks, that trash had rewritten the rules of air superiority over Burma. The Mosquito didn't just survive encounters with the vaunted A6M0 and the Ki-43 Oscar. It killed them, by the dozens, in minutes. And the men who mocked it died without understanding what had destroyed them. The story begins not in combat, but in silence. For 2 years, Allied intelligence had intercepted fragments of Japanese transmissions, radio chatter laced with contempt. British bombers were slow, American fighters were heavy, but the Mosquito, when mentioned at all, was dismissed as a reconnaissance nuisance, a wooden toy. Imperial Navy aviators, trained in the philosophy of Bushido and the superiority of the Zero, believed that no plywood frame could withstand the G-forces of dogfighting. No wooden wing could carry the armament needed to challenge steel. They were wrong, and by the time they realized it, the sky over the Bay of Bengal had become a graveyard. The de Havilland Mosquito was never designed to be underestimated. Its construction was born from necessity, not nostalgia. In 1940, Britain faced a steel shortage. Aluminum was reserved for Spitfires and Lancasters. The Mosquito's designers, Geoffrey de Havilland and his team, turned to wood. But not just any wood. The fuselage was a laminated sandwich of Canadian birch and Ecuadorian balsa, bonded with casein glue under hydraulic pressure. The wings were spruce, shaped in steam molds and coated with Irish linen doped with cellulose. The result was a frame lighter than metal, stronger than expected, and invisible to early forms of radar detection. It could fly at 380 miles per hour, faster than most fighters. It could carry 4 20mm Hispano cannons and 4 303 Browning machine guns, more firepower than a bomber. And it could do all of this with a crew of 2, no defensive gunner and no excess weight. But speed and armament meant nothing if the enemy didn't take you seriously. And the Japanese didn't. Not at first. On May 12, 1944, a formation of 6 Mosquito FB. 6 fighter bombers departed Cuttack for a low-level strike against Japanese supply depots near Rangoon. The mission was routine. The target was a rail junction used to funnel ammunition and medical supplies toward the front lines in Imphal. Intelligence predicted light resistance, a few flak batteries, perhaps a patrol of Oscars. What the crews encountered instead was a full squadron of 15 A6M0s scrambled from Mingaladon airfield. The Japanese pilots, seeing the wooden silhouettes against the monsoon clouds, broke formation and dove. They expected an easy kill, a morale boost, a confirmation of their superiority. The first Zero opened fire at 400 yards. It's 7mm rounds stitched across the Mosquito's tail. The plywood absorbed the impact without rupturing. The British pilot, Flight Lieutenant Colin Shand, 26 years old, a former instructor from Devon, didn't pull up. He didn't evade. He rolled inverted, cut throttle, and let the Zero overshoot. Then he brought the nose around and fired a 2-second burst from all 4 cannons. The Zero disintegrated. Pieces of cowling, wing, and cockpit tumbled into the jungle below. Shand's navigator, Sergeant Arthur Lowe, marked the kill in his logbook with a single word: surprised. Within 3 minutes, 4 more Zeros were down. The Mosquitoes didn't dogfight in the traditional sense. They didn't loop or spiral. They used speed to dictate engagement. Cannons to shred targets in single passes, and wood to absorb punishment that would have crippled metal. The Japanese pilots, trained to exploit the slow turn rates of Allied bombers, found themselves outpaced and outgunned. By the time the surviving Zeros broke off, the rail junction was in flames, and the Mosquitoes were already 50 miles away, untouched. The engagement was logged, filed, and classified. The British did not publicize it, the Japanese did not report it, but the wreckage spoke. And in the weeks that followed, the mockery stopped. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts travel and at what moments of the day or night they reach you. The second encounter came 17 days later, and it was not an accident. It was a test. On May 29, 1944, Japanese Naval Air Command issued a directive to all fighter units stationed in Burma and Thailand: engage and destroy the British wooden aircraft. The order was unsigned, but its intent was clear. The Mosquito had become a threat, not to morale, but to operations. In the span of 2 weeks, it had disrupted 3 supply convoys, destroyed 2 fuel depots, and shot down 11 fighters without losing a single airframe. Imperial headquarters wanted answers. They wanted wreckage. They wanted proof that the wooden aircraft could be beaten. The trap was set over the Irrawaddy Delta. Intelligence suggested that a Mosquito reconnaissance flight would pass through the area at dawn, photographing Japanese troop movements near Prome. 12 Ki-43 Oscars, lighter, more maneuverable than the Zero, were positioned in 2 layers, 6 at 8,000 feet, 6 at 12,000 feet. The plan was to box the Mosquito in, force it into a climbing turn, and exploit the supposed weakness of its wooden frame under stress. The Japanese pilots were confident the Oscar could outturn anything the Allies flew, and would, they believed, would crack under sustained G-forces. The Mosquito that entered the airspace that morning was piloted by squadron leader James Mears, 32, a New Zealander who had flown Blenheims during the fall of France. His navigator was Flying Officer David Harrington, a Cambridge-educated mathematician who calculated fuel consumption in his head and never spoke during combat. They were not there to take photographs. They were there to kill. The first Oscar dove at 0547 hours. Mears saw it 3 seconds before the Japanese pilot opened fire. He pushed the throttles forward, accelerating to 370 miles per hour in level flight. The Oscar, already at maximum speed in its dive, couldn't keep pace. Mears didn't evade. He climbed a shallow, controlled ascent that brought him into the path of the second layer. The Oscars at 12,000 feet rolled into attack position, expecting the Mosquito to stall, to fall, to break apart under the strain of the turn. It didn't. The plywood skin flexed. The spruce spars absorbed the load. Mears leveled off, inverted the aircraft, and fired a 3-second burst into the belly of the nearest Oscar. The Japanese fighter exploded. Harrington logged the time. Mears said nothing. The remaining Oscars swarmed. This was no longer a tactical engagement. It was desperation. The Japanese pilots, trained to believe in the supremacy of maneuverability, found themselves chasing an aircraft that refused to slow down, refused to turn predictably, and refused to die. Mears used the Mosquito's speed to separate the formation, picking off stragglers one by one. By 0602 hours, 5 Oscars were down. The survivors broke off and fled south. Mears did not pursue. He turned west, completed the reconnaissance run, and landed at Cuttack 90 minutes later. The ground crew counted 14 bullet holes in the fuselage. None had penetrated the inner frame. The engagement was not reported in Japanese military records, but it was discussed in mess halls, in briefing rooms, in the private diaries of pilots who survived. One entry, recovered decades later from the estate of a former Ki-43 pilot, read, "The wood does not burn, the wood does not break. We do not understand what we are fighting." They were fighting the future, but they didn't know it yet. By June 1944, the Mosquito was no longer an anomaly. It was a doctrine. RAF squadrons across Southeast Asia began re-equipping with the wooden fighter bomber, not because of propaganda, but because of results. The aircraft's operational readiness rate was 87%, higher than any metal-framed equivalent. Its loss rate in combat was 3%, lower than Spitfires, Hurricanes and P-51s operating in the same theater, and its psychological impact on Japanese aircrews was measurable. Intercepts of radio communications revealed a pattern. Japanese pilots were refusing to engage Mosquitoes unless they had numerical superiority of at least 3-1. Even then, they hesitated. The most telling incident occurred on June 14th during a raid on the port of Moulmein. 4 Mosquitoes, tasked with destroying a coastal ammunition dump, encountered a formation of 18 A6M-0s, the largest concentration of Japanese fighters seen in Burma since the Imphal offensive. The Zeros had altitude, numbers and position. They should have annihilated the British formation. Instead, they circled. For 4 minutes, they circled. The Mosquitoes completed their bombing run, set the depot ablaze, and turned for home. Only then did the Zeros attack, and only 6 of them. The rest held back, watching, waiting, afraid. The engagement lasted 90 seconds. 2 Zeros went down. The Mosquitoes escaped without damage. The British crews were baffled. The Japanese commanders were humiliated. And the men who had mocked the wooden aircraft 6 weeks earlier were now writing letters home, asking for reassignment, for transfer, for anything that would keep them out of the sky when the Mosquitoes flew. If this story surprised you, make sure to leave a like to support the channel. But the turning point came not in combat, but in silence. On June 22nd, a damaged Mosquito made an emergency landing on a sandbar in the Chindwin River, deep in Japanese-held territory. The crew, both injured, were captured. The aircraft was intact. For the first time, Japanese engineers had access to the enemy's wooden secret. They studied it, measured it, tested it, and what they found shattered every assumption. The plywood skin was not a weakness. It was a composite material, stronger per unit weight than the aluminum used in Zero construction. The balsa core absorbed vibration and dissipated stress in ways that metal could not. The spruce spars were laminated in 7 layers, each grain oriented differently, creating a structure that flexed under load and returned to shape without permanent deformation. The glue, casein, derived from milk protein, bonded the wood at a molecular level, creating seams stronger than the surrounding material. The Mosquito wasn't primitive, it was advanced, and the Japanese had no equivalent. The report was filed, classified, never acted upon. By the time it reached Naval Air Command, the war had shifted. The Americans were island-hopping across the Pacific. The British were advancing through Burma. And the Mosquito, the wooden aircraft that was supposed to be trash, was shooting down Zeros faster than Japan could replace them. The final documented engagement occurred on August 3rd, 1944, over the Andaman Sea. A lone Mosquito PR-16s, a high-altitude photo reconnaissance variant, was returning from a mission over the Nicobar Islands when it was intercepted by 6 Zeros from the 381st Naval Air Group. The Japanese pilots were veterans. They had survived Midway, Guadalcanal, and the grinding attrition of the Solomon Islands. They knew how to kill, and they were determined to prove that the Mosquito, despite its reputation, could still be beaten. The Mosquito's pilot was Flight Lieutenant Edward Sismore, 29, from Suffolk. His navigator was Pilot Officer Ian Mackay, 24, a Scot who had once been a competitive rower. They were unarmed. The PR-15 variant carried no cannons, no machine guns, only cameras and fuel. Its defense was speed, and at 25,000 feet over open water, there was nowhere to hide. The Zeros attacked from above, diving in pairs. Sismore pushed the Mosquito into a shallow descent, trading altitude for velocity. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour. The Zeros followed, but their controls stiffened at high speed. Their pilots fought to maintain aim. Sizemore didn't maneuver wildly. He flew a straight line, adjusting course in tiny increments, forcing the Zeros to overshoot or pull up early. The first pair fired and missed. The second pair fired and hit, rounds punching through the tail section, shattering the wooden elevator. The Mosquito shuddered but held together. Mackay, monitoring fuel and airspeed, called out the numbers. Sizemore didn't respond. He was calculating. The Zeros had one advantage, numbers. The Mosquito had another, endurance. The Japanese fighters, designed for short-range interception, burned fuel at twice the rate of the British aircraft. Sizemore's strategy was simple: outlast them. For 11 minutes, the chase continued. The Zeros fired until their ammunition was exhausted. They dove until their fuel gauges touched red, and then, one by one, they turned back. Sizemore kept flying. When the Mosquito landed at Cuttack 3 hours later, the ground crew found 47 bullet holes in the airframe. The tail was held together by 3 spars and a strip of linen. Mackay had a cut on his forehead from a ricocheting fragment. Sizemore had flown the entire return leg with one hand, the other clutching a cracked rib. The engagement was logged, the Mosquito was repaired, and the Zeros never came back. The war ended, the wood remained. In the decades after 1945, the Mosquito's service record was declassified slowly, reluctantly, as if the truth itself was too strange to be believed. The aircraft had flown over 28 zero combat sorties across all theaters of operation. It had destroyed 600 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, more than any other British type in the Pacific theater, and comparable to the legendary Spitfire's tally in Europe. And it had done so with a loss rate so low that some squadrons went months without a single casualty. The wood that Japanese pilots had mocked became the subject of engineering studies, dissertations, and grudging admiration. Universities in Britain, Germany, and even post-war Japan incorporated the Mosquito's design principles into their aeronautical curricula. The composite construction methods pioneered by de Havilland would, decades later, influence the development of modern jet fighters and commercial aircraft. But the human cost was harder to quantify. The psychological toll on Japanese aviators who survived encounters with the Mosquito manifested in ways that military psychiatrists struggled to document. In 2003, a researcher in Tokyo uncovered a cache of personal letters written by Japanese pilots between 1944 and 1945, recovered from a private archive in Hiroshima. Many mentioned the Mosquito. Some described it with technical precision, analyzing its speed characteristics and firepower. Others used words like Yurei, ghost. One letter dated July 1944 from a Zero pilot named Lieutenant Hideaki Sato to his younger brother read, "Do not believe what they tell you about the wooden aircraft. It is not weak, it is not slow, and it does not forgive mistakes. I have seen 6 men die trying to prove otherwise. The shame of it will follow me whether I live or die." Another pilot, Ensign Takeshi Yamamoto, wrote to his mother in August 1944, "Mother, I must tell you something that I cannot tell my commanders. The enemy has not defeated us with superior numbers or tactics. They have defeated us with wood and speed. We were taught to believe that spirit and training and honor could overcome any machine. We were wrong. The machine does not care about honor. The machine only cares about physics, and physics is merciless." The letters were carefully preserved by Yamamoto's widow after the war. She kept them in a sealed box, never showing them to anyone until 2001, when she donated them to a military history archive. Yamamoto himself did not survive the war. He was killed in a dogfight over the Irrawaddy Delta in September 1944, likely by a Mosquito, though the records were never confirmed. His final diary entry, dated September 8th, simply stated, "Tomorrow we fly again. I do not expect to return." The British crews who flew the Mosquito rarely spoke of their victories after the war ended. Most returned to civilian life, compartmentalizing their service into a sealed chapter of history. Edward Sismore, the pilot who outran 6 Zeros over the Andaman Sea, opened a small bookstore in Norwich, specializing in maritime history. He worked there for 42 years, from 1946 until his retirement in 1988. Colleagues remember him as quiet, precise, and deeply knowledgeable about naval affairs, though never once did he mention his own wartime experiences. His navigator, Ian Mackay, became a flight instructor in Glasgow, training pilots for civil aviation. He was known for his meticulous approach to safety and his insistence that his students understand the physics of flight, not merely the mechanics. James Mears, who destroyed 5 Ki-43 Oscars in a single engagement over the Irrawaddy Delta, became an agricultural engineer in New Zealand. He designed irrigation systems for dairy farms across the North Island, work that was technically complex and utterly removed from combat. When interviewed by a historian in 1992 at age 80, Mears spoke about his wartime service with remarkable detachment. "We did what was necessary," he said. "The aircraft was superior. The enemy eventually recognized this. Wars are won by those who adapt, not those who insist on tradition." Colin Shand, the first pilot to encounter the Japanese formation over Burma, worked in agricultural administration in Devon. He married, had 3 children, and lived a life of deliberate ordinariness. In 1998, a local historian approached him about his combat record. Shand initially refused to be interviewed, but after some persuasion, he agreed to a single conversation. When asked about the moment he destroyed the first Zero, Shand became silent for almost a minute. Then he said, "I didn't think of it as heroic. I thought of it as a job. We had a tool, the Mosquito, that was better than their tool. So we used it, that's all. Don't make it into something more profound than it was." But the engineering records told a different story. After the war, captured German and Japanese aircraft were analyzed by Allied technical teams. The comparisons were stark. The Mosquito's wooden construction achieved a power-to-weight ratio that metal aircraft of the era could not match. Its fuel efficiency was superior by 30%. Its structural integrity under combat stress was demonstrably greater. The composite materials, the laminated wood, the casein adhesive, the linen fabric, created a structure that was not just lighter, but fundamentally more resilient than aluminum. Vibrations that would crack metal were absorbed by wood. Stresses that would cause metal fatigue dissipated through the grain structure. The aircraft was, in essence, a living thing. It flexed, adapted, and healed itself in ways that rigid metal never could. The last operational Mosquito was retired in 1963. By then, the men who had called it trash were gone, lost in the war, aged into silence, or unwilling to admit what they had learned too late. Hideaki Sato was dead. Takeshi Yamamoto was dead. The Japanese Navy was gone. The Empire was gone. And the Mosquito, the aircraft that was supposed to be obsolete before it was even built, had outlived empires and reshaped aviation forever. The wood outlasted the steel. The plywood outlasted the aluminum. The material that industry believed was a temporary wartime solution became a blueprint for the future. In the 1960s, when composite aircraft construction became feasible, engineers returned to principles de Havilland had established in 1940. Modern fighter jets, commercial airliners, and spacecraft all carry the fingerprints of the Mosquito's design philosophy. The lesson, inscribed in bullet holes and archived reports, in recovered letters and declassified engineering analyses, remained: what you underestimate will kill you. The Japanese pilots who dismissed the wooden aircraft as primitive were not wrong about its composition. They were wrong about what that composition meant. They mistook simplicity for weakness, tradition for superiority, and confidence for wisdom. By the time they understood their error, it was too late. The victory was already written in the sky. The Mosquito did not win the war. But it proved that survival is not about strength. It's about adaptation. It's about being willing to question assumptions. It's about recognizing that the future is not always built from the materials the past considered essential. Sometimes the future is built from the materials the past discarded. And sometimes the greatest weapons are the ones your enemy refuses to take seriously until it's far too late to change strategy. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cases and curiosities from World War II. Thank you for following the story. See you in the next video.